Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of In the Prog Seat. It's Tuesday night. Thanks for joining us. Hope you all had a great weekend and are ready to talk prog once again. And of course, it is album study time once again. Album review. This turnaround, it's Mr. Canzaneri's show today, but let me introduce everybody. I'll start from the bottom. Chris Canzaneri's in the house. He's going to be our MC for tonight. Chuck Alvarez is here. Chad Hutchinson is here. George Lemay is here. Ken Golden, Professor of Prog, is here, our center square tonight. We've got Mr. Anthony Ferraris here. He's holding up the album in question. We've got Eric Porter and, of course, Mr. Louis Nasser. Greetings, everyone.
Greetings.
Hey,
Good to see you all again.
Good evening.
So, as we do with these album studies, we have one of the crew picks an album. We get 2 weeks to listen to it. For some of us, maybe the first time we've heard these albums. For many of us, these may be old favorites or maybe not favorites, but we know them or don't know them. Anyway, we've been listening to them for the last couple of weeks. And today we're going to talk all about John Barleycorn Must Die from the great band, British band Traffic. One of those bands that kind of, are they prog? Are they not prog? They certainly do some prog. They do some jazz rock. They do some folk. They do some straight up pop and psych. They do a little bit of everything. So they're a band that's been called everything under the sun. We're going to talk about John Barleycorn Must Die today. And with all that being said, I will turn it over to the Cans himself to lead the charge on tonight's episode.
okay, thanks, Pete. This is an album that came out in July of 1970. It was originally supposed to be Steve Winwood's first solo album. He started work on it, and I guess he got lonely, and he got Jim Capaldi and Chris Wood to come back and work with him on this. They did not get Dave Mason to come back this time. He did rejoin the band later, but it wound up being these three on this album. Capaldi played some drums, Chris Wood did woodwinds, and Stevie Winwood played just about every other instrument on there, including drums at some point. But yeah, you know, he got these boys back and they reformed. This was after he had been in blind faith for a little while. I think he and Capaldi also were in Ginger Baker's Air Force, maybe. You know, he did a few things in between the last Traffic album and this turned into a Traffic album. So this was number 5 in the US. I think it hit number 11 in the UK, which is very high charting for them. I think this was their most successful album up until that point. It went gold, blah, 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 even though there aren't really any big hits on the album. They've had bigger hits from other albums. This was sort of a move away from the more psychedelic stuff they had been doing up until this point. They sort of went into some sort of extended arrangements, longer songs, a little bit more exploration. Some stuff's a little bit jazzy. There's some, you know, the title track is an old folk song from, you know, I think like the 1600s or something. I read today the lyrics to this particular version that they're doing were based on a treatment of it by Robbie Burns, the, you know, incredibly important and famous Scottish poet. No Stephen here. I'm sure he's probably pretty well familiar with Robbie Burns, but that's what they wound up doing here. And said, you know, like, is it prog? I don't know. I mean, if you judge this on the really positive reviews it got at the time, no, it's not prog. Nobody was reviewing prog albums very in a very favorable light. And around this time, in 1970, you know, there was no Trespass from Genesis yet. This came out before that. There was no Yes album yet. You know, there was King Crimson. There were some Canterbury bands. I don't know how active they were at the time. There's like Fairport Convention, who were exploring the folk stuff, sort of like John Barleycorn, the title track here. But you know, this to me, I was surprised when I really double checked on how early it came out. To me, it's like, oh, this album, you know, it's like 74, 75. But no, this is 1970. This was, you know, they were breaking some new ground here. So I'm not going to track by track it or anything like that. I want to get into what you guys think. I guess I'll start with Eric. There's not one single electric guitar on this album. How do you feel about that?
I
There
missed the guitar. I thought
There are some guitars.
What's
Towards
that?
the end, yeah.
what is it?
Stranger,
Stranger to
to
Himself has some guitar in it.
Mhm.
And I do like
Every
the back
mother's
end.
son.
I like the back end of this better because you get the acoustic guitar. I mean, you got to give credit to Steve Winwood, right? I mean, he's pretty much he like you said, he's playing pretty much everything except the drums, I think, throughout this, and obviously the woodwinds. But I think what I got from this, as we were going through this and doing the album studies, I have the CD. Obviously, I've had it for years, and I'm thinking, when is the last time I pulled this CD off the shelf? And it's been a long time. I can't tell you how long. So right off the bat, I'm kind of like, why haven't I played this? The songs were very familiar. It's not like one or two songs. As I was going through listening to this, I'm like, every song's, oh yeah, okay, I remember that, and listening to it. And I like the melodies of this. I think the vibe I got from it, which I know a lot of people will go Allman Brothers and the Dead. I'm thinking this is kind of a template for a lot of the jam bands too. I mean, you got Glad that opens it up. You've got an instrumental that just kind of goes. I mean, I get a lot of that. It's kind of that mid-tempo-y through a lot of it, where just kind of laid back, find a groove, play. I love the piano and the Hammond. So, I mean, if there's not going to be guitar and they're throwing that in there, I'm enjoying that through Glad. But I guess I kind of went back to the, like, I just have not played this, or honestly any Traffic in years. So I like it. Good album, good listen, good to revisit. I don't know that I can say I love it, but I do like Steve Winwood's voice. So again, we've had a 2 for 2 the last couple of weeks. I like his voice. I've always liked his voice. But I don't know. I think that was the question I kept asking myself, is why haven't I pulled this? Or I think I have Low Spark. Those might be the only 2 Traffic that I own. But honestly, I was like, I probably haven't pulled this off the shelf in 25 years. So good album, good to revisit, but that's kind of the vibe it gave me when I went back and listened to this all the way through. I'm like, this is kind of a template, or at least to me, I'm like, I can see a lot of the jam bands taking stuff from this and saying, maybe building off of that. You always hear the Dead and the Allman Brothers, but I think this has that kind of feel to it as well.
Have we broken the vocal taboo 2 episodes in a row for you?
2 in a row.
Wow.
This is a good singer, though.
Yeah.
But you can see here, there's only 6 songs on the original version of this album. There aren't really any deep cuts. I was thinking the same thing myself when I went back. Is like, these are all so familiar.
Yeah.
You listen to this album, you're done in 40 minutes, and you knew all the songs to begin with.
I think that's what surprised me. Like, I'm like, okay, yep, I remember this. I remember this. It all resonated. So
All came back.
that definitely.
So when I picked this, I expected at least 2 of you to dislike this. And I think one of them, actually, I'm pretty sure that one of them was Lewis. Dude, let's have it. Let me have it. Let's hear it.
So, first off, disclaimer. I am a total Traffic newbie. Steve Winwood is a name that I've heard often, but I hadn't really heard him. So I was glad you picked this, because it gave me a reason to go out to Reckless and buy this. I didn't have this. I bought it for this. And I never heard it. Now, unbeknown to me, I was about one of the things I was gonna fucking shit on in this record is the fact that the last track on side 1 and the last track on side 2 are utter horseshit. But it turns out those were not in the actual record. And this is a reissue, apparently remastered in 2001. So what would be the last track in side 1 is a thing called I Just Want You to Know.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want you to know, Steve Winwood, you're a fucking asshole. This song blows. And then the other one is Sitting Here Thinking of My Love. Jesus fucking Christ. I mean,
There's a reason why those 2 songs were left off the album.
Exactly.
yes, there's a reason the cutting room floor exists. So whoever the fuck it was that decided that this would be a great ad, you're an idiot. It really subtracts, okay? So I would have enjoyed this a lot more without those 2. I only learned this recently. I heard this record
So Lewis, when you bought that, that's in the sequence. They don't have the album. And
Yeah,
then
yeah,
this
they
is-
come sequenced like that. So I mean,
Oh,
you
okay.
can
I
see
didn't
that
know
track
that.
4. I just want you to know, and track 8 is thinking about my love or whatever the fuck that is. And
What is that? What is that like a
you see-
special? That's
Yeah.
a special
Surprised they did
Mexican
that.
edition.
this is I'm not wearing my glasses, but yeah,
Yeah,
this
it's
is.
2001.
I mean, the CD is pink,
Yeah, it's 2001.
and all right. Now, having said that, let's say a few more words. And I know that the viewers in this channel sometimes get really, really irritated when you say things that are not exactly flattering to the things that they love, right? Even if you say things like, oh, Cookie Monster vocals, they fucking lose their shit, right? So I'm looking at you, motherfuckers. I'm talking directly to you, and I don't give a single fuck. Here we go. There it is. So, my opinion, the first track, Glad, it sounds exactly like the title. It's an inoffensive little jam. It doesn't really inspire me, but it doesn't piss me off. It's cool, right? It's fine. It's fine. Now, when they do Freedom Rider, one thing that and this is just me, one thing that really, really, really irks me is when a woodwind instrument is out of tune. And that very first fucking flute note is flat. Now, I don't know who's the asshole who produced this, but come on, man, earn your keep. Just tell him to stop, do it again, right? How hard is that? Now, it does redeem itself because then it has these harmony flutes and things, and it's an okay song. I mean, I enjoy it for what it is. It's fine. But I will say, I know everybody loves Steve Winwood. I'm very surprised to hear that Eric likes the singing because I don't. And the reason I don't is because I find that he is always at the point where his voice is about to break. And to me, that there are some singers who really work well at that point, like Ian Gillan was amazing, just fucking a rock god. And then you have Winwood. I'm not hearing it. So there are parts where he really sounds great. I'm not saying it's across the board, but like his first vocal intervention in this record, along with that flat note, really, really irritated me. I also have to say, when I told the guys in Sonos that I was doing this, the instant reaction from Steve Royce and Rich Poston, oh, great album. And I told them, you're not going to like to hear what I have to say, but okay. And but yeah, everybody loves it. I think people love it for many good reasons, which all the rest of you are gonna say. But Freedom Rider is it's a pretty decent song. It's pretty cool. I preferred Empty Pages. Empty Pages to me is a song that is better composed. It just hangs better. It sits better in his vocal register. Now there's another problem that I have with this record that I just want to get out front. It has the same problems that many records have, like Unfolded Like Staircase and others. The drums were recorded like shit. Like, I can get better resonance just fucking slapping my belly. I don't understand why they would spend all this money to make a record that sounds this bad. But it sounds terrible, and the mix is absolutely awful. Go back to Freedom Rider. Suddenly, this guy is singing top voice, and all you hear is the organ. And then he's singing again, and now you can hear them both. To me, this is just amateurish fucking mix errors everywhere, which I really dislike. So, at first I thought this guy Capaldi, who I didn't really know, I was hearing him be more like a feather tapper. I know that's going to irritate people. How dare I call the great Capaldi a fucking feather tapper? That's what I heard. However, he's not a feather tapper. It's just that the drums are very poorly mic'd and very poorly mixed. So that doesn't help him. He's more of a touch drummer. And if you don't get the right sound, then you're basically fucking him. So that's not his fault. So that's that. Now, side 2, Stranger to Himself, is an interesting tune. I don't love it, but I didn't hate it. The title track is interesting because it's more than 6 minutes long with just 2 chords. And I understand that it's a folk song, but folk songs are usually 2 minutes long. So to me, it's like, come on, do something. To me, this would be a song that would have hit the cutting room floor for Jethro Tull. It's not that interesting. I mean, and in that subject, very few bands have the extra track material of Jethro Tull. That is top quality, deep, right? This was not cutting room floor, but I didn't find it to be that interesting. Although I'm sure that my buddy, my compadre, the man in the yellow hoodie, really loves this song because I think this is in his wheelhouse. But for me, it's nice. It's nice, but it's a little overlong. And then when you get to Every Mother's Son, it's that's a good album closer, I thought, and it turns out that it is, right? But then you get to this other piece of shit sitting here thinking of My Love, and I thought, all right, these guys are not just taking the piss, right? How could anyone think this is how you close an album? Was beyond me. So part of my original anger was directed at this particular sequence, which I didn't realize until later. That's not the actual album. So if I judge the album the way that you hold it up, Cans, I think that it's actually pretty decent. It's inoffensive. I realize that it happened in 1970, but yeah, that's the same year that Jethro Tull put out Benefit. That's the same year of yeah, what a fucking record that is. That's the same year that the Who did Live at Leeds. There was some really interesting shit happening in 1970 as well. So as far as, should we even mention all the stuff that Miles Davis and other people were doing in jazz? So jazz my ass. This is not jazz. This is soft rock. I hear this is soft rock. And it's nice. It took me a while to really understand the vibe of the record because yeah, it does seem to want to. It felt like a lap dance, like something's gonna happen, but then it doesn't. And I don't like that. I don't like emotional manipulation. So from that perspective, I was less than impressed. But without those offending tracks, and I did the exercise of listening to it without them, it actually works a lot better. So for people who, and again, I just heard it. Had I heard this decades ago, I would have a completely different impression of this, right? Because first impressions matter. But coming at it at my age, with my listening background and everything, I was very much underwhelmed. People discuss it as prog. I don't want to get into whether it's prog or not. I don't care. I think that it has enough adventurous spirit to qualify for discussion, and I'm glad you picked it because I would have never heard it otherwise. And it has some really cool things, but I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's amazing because to me it isn't. It's just not.
You liked it a lot more than I thought you would.
Well, yeah, but you know why? I revised it because once you take out those shitty songs from the circulation, and Ken said that before, and he's absolutely right. The sequencing of an album is absolutely imperative. It can make or break a record. It's not just songs. So when you take those out and you let those songs flow in order, it is an entirely different listening experience. So that saved it for me. Knowing that, hey, these songs were not originally there, and that you could just listen to it the way it was originally intended, that's fantastic. It improved it a lot, truly. So I just want to say that, and let the hate come. I'm ready. I thrive on it. It's fucking my jam. So
Awesome. All right, man in the yellow hoodie. What are you thinking?
I bought this in probably 2001 after I saw the live video from Santa Monica of John Barleycorn. I really, as Luis said, it was kind of up my alley. It was my jam. I had no idea.
good thing.
Like a 18th century, 17th century folk remake, but it's still my jam. I think at the time when I bought it, I really wasn't into the jazzier side of things, but after re-listening to it, Glad is amazing. It's got like a combination of like, rock, jazz, and then like towards the end, it's just the atmospheric part comes in. It's just beautiful. Freedom Rider, it's kind of like a nice segue into Freedom Rider. With Winwood's got a fantastic voice, so that works well. And I think Luis is right. I think Empty Pages is kind of like the star of the album. I think Winwood's vocal is just amazing. I think it's a really good album, but I kind of feel like this album was kind of like a little foreshadowing of where they were going to go with their next album, which to me is their masterpiece. Low Spark to me is just second. That's the one I listen to a lot. I've had Drunk Barleycorn for 20 years, and it's been a while since I listened to it. Usually the one I usually go to is either Low Spark, or as Ken and I were discussing, what was it, Graveyard, the one with Graveyard People, Ken? What's that called? Where Eagle Flies.
When Eagle Flies.
Yeah, those are the two
Yeah,
I
that's
usually
right.
read. It's been a while since I listened to this, but yeah, as Luis says, John Barleycorn was the reason why I went out and bought it, because it kind of had that vibe to it, that little haunting acoustic vibe, and Winwood's vocal works perfectly with it. So I dig it. I dig it. It's not a masterpiece, but I really dig it. It's got a lot of cool stuff on it.
The title track really suits his vocal range as well.
Yeah.
So it really does highlight him at his best, I think.
And I think some of the flute parts by Chris Wood are just absolutely phenomenal. I'm kind of a sucker for flute anyway, but they just hit me the right way when I was listening to it the other day.
Yeah.
So you like flute, you don't like saxophones.
I don't like. I like. What the heck's his name?
Wayne
The guy
Shorter?
from King Crimson and Roger Waters and Rick Wright on sax from King Crimson.
Mel Collins.
Mel Collins. For some reason, he hits me the right way. I have no idea why.
No Dave Jackson?
Oh, no.
Peter Hamill's voice ruins that.
Yes, it does.
You know what it is, Anthony? There's a physics answer to your question. I'll tell you what it is. A flute is a pipe that is open at both ends. And just like a guitar string, it has every possible harmonic in it. When you play a note, it has double the frequency, triple the frequency, 4 times, 5 times, etc. A saxophone is a pipe that is open at one end but closed at the other. And those instruments only have the fundamental 3 times that, 5 times that, 7 times that, so all the odd harmonics. So this is why it's never difficult for you to hear sax in a mix. There's less information to it, but it also has a certain sharpness to it. It's a little, it cuts, right? So if you like the softies, the sax is a little aggressive. It's just a different quality of sound. So you can always tell that to people who give you shit. So I just like all the harmonic content. I don't like just half.
So why don't I like trumpet?
Trumpet is the same as the sax.
Mhm.
It's a pipe open at one end, closed at the other. Yeah.
No, I guess my main point, Chris, is this feels like, after listening to it and after knowing Low Spark as well as I do, this was kind of like a foreshadowing where they were going to go, because their previous records were more like psychedelic. Kind of like English pop.
Trippy.
Yeah, like Dear Mr. Fantasy. That was the big one.
Yep.
All right. Mr. Charles.
So you were working with the reissued version yesterday.
Yes. Mhm. Yes.
What do you think of that versus the original?
All right. I prefer the original. Those 2 tracks really are not good tracks, But unlike most here, so I've always loved this album. This is one of the first ever albums that I've ever purchased. Once I started working back in 1988, straight out of high school. People should know is that at least here in New York City, 5 of the 6 songs, including the title track, used to always get played on what's a FM radio over here on WNEW 102.7. Glad, Freedom Rider, and Empty Pages. It was always those 3 songs playing back to back to back, and I was always ingrained in them. So when I bought this album, I was after flipping over to the next side, I thought that the second side was just as strong, if not stronger, than the first side. But that's just me, because I've always loved Traffic. And when you listen to Steve Winwood, you always you have to think about Ray Charles. You know, he's one of these guys that that was influenced by Ray Charles, as long as with Guy Brooker from Procol Harum. Then you also have that Peter Gabriel, who also was influenced by. If you listen to them, they all have the same type of timbre in their voices. I've always loved them, but just like what Lewis said, and so you could see that there was a little bit stretching, but you also have to remember, just as Christian said, is that remember these songs basically they were demos that Steve Winwood had or that he had recorded, and then everybody else just put their parts to it. That's why it sounds like kind of convoluted as it did. But just like Anthony said, and so this album over here, and so while it's a great album, and so I just thought that when they added a proper bassist, which was Rick Gretsch from Traffic, forgive me, from Family, and also Blind Faith, that they had a strong bass player. And when they went to Jim Gordon on the drums, they had a steadier drummer.
The killer.
Yep,
Jim
yeah,
Gordon,
literally, literally. But I've always loved John Barleycorn Must Die. So I'm probably in the minority, and so where I think that this album is just great. You know, it's demo-ish at times and so, but it's still an excellent album to me. But I think that Low Spark and High Heel Boys is when the band really started to hit their stride. It's because, like I said, they had all these musicians that could play their proper instruments, and from there they just went from there. So, but anyway, I've always loved Glad, Freedom Rider, and Empty Pages. In its own sweetness. It's a perfect album in my opinion. One of my favorites from Traffic.
Can I ask you guys a question just for my own edification?
Mm-hmm.
Number one, I didn't know that these were the demos with the other guy just adding at the end,
mm-hmm.
Which begs the question: then why would they not just have them re-record them properly in the studio?
Because I guess because from what I read, and so is that what's like was mentioned, and so Steve Winwood had actually did this on his own, and so then all of a sudden they probably figured that whatever he had here was strong enough to put forth, but sometimes it just doesn't work out that way. If you've ever heard live versions of these songs, and so it works much better live.
That was going to be my second question.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these tracks is Steve Winwood doing everything except
Mm-hmm.
Jim Capaldi's playing drums.
Mm-hmm.
So as a three-piece, how did they play these four instrumental voices songs?
Capaldi used to sing with him.
Live guitars, or how did they do it?
Well, the live, sometimes Steve Winwood would play the keyboards. Well, he would play the guitar, and Chris Wood would sometimes play the keyboards as well. But but his strongest suits is that he's the woodwind player. He's the flautist, and he's also the saxophonist.
Yeah. But they would never play the arrangement like on the album then.
No, there was more jam-like.
I see.
Mm-hmm.
I see.
Okay. Hey, Luis, I think if you saw Elias on Hill live, I think you'd dig it.
Oh Lord, here we go.
I would dig it in a 6 foot deep fucking pit. Yeah, that's what I would do.
I think one of the things too about Traffic we have to remember, I think, early on when Dave Mason was in the band, I think they were a little more flexible because you bring up a good point, Lewis. It's like Winwood is a multi-instrumentalist and very, very good at everything he plays. So when they're doing these albums and he's doing all the, electric piano, organ, guitars, bass, vocals, and then they go to play it live, it's like if you stick him on the keyboards the whole time, you're missing out on his guitar prowess and vice versa. And I think when Mason was in the band, he's an excellent guitar player as well, and they could keep Winwood behind the microphone and the keyboards, and it was okay. So going forward, I think it was that's why the music of the band changed a little bit after Mason left, and it became less guitar reliant and more keyboard based just because of that kind of arrangement.
I see. Interesting. I just kept hearing this, like, how are they going to pull this off live? Well, I see Steve Winwood and then Capaldi drums, like, okay. That's before they had loopers, right? And things like that. So
I'm glad you mentioned the WNEW, Chuck. That's where I heard this first as a kid. I remember hearing Glad when I was probably in high school, and I'm like, it's like the grown-up version of the Peanuts song from the Christmas thing. And I love that song. I love that song.
Mhm,
I think that's what made me buy it. I mean, I've had this since I
Mhm.
was probably 19 or 20.
mhm.
But
About the same. Mhm.
yeah. So Chad, I think this was new to you though. So
Yeah, as an album,
first
yeah,
years, what do you think?
yeah. As an album, it was new to me. I've never listened to a Traffic album because I've never been really grabbed enough by their music to listen to them. I did recognize Glad, and I knew Empty Pages. Obviously, I know Low Spark. Can't say I'm really taken by any of it, to be honest with you. This album was okay. Like I said, I like Glad. I like Empty Pages. Not much else did much for me. Stranger to Himself was okay. I think the piano and organ on this is great. I think Steve Winwood should stick to the acoustic guitar, not the electric guitar.
Yes.
I thought his
Mhm.
solo in Stranger to Himself was awkward. I'll
Meandering.
use the word awkward. I think using a studio musician at least for a solo here and there may have been a good idea. Um, the album as a whole, you guys kind of just covered it, does feel like a demo. I feel like it's missing something, whether it's the way it's recorded or the era or whatever, but it has a demo feel to it. And I feel like they either could have done a better job of recording, like Luis said, or bring in other instruments to fill in the space. It just didn't feel like a full realized recording to me. Where was I going to go with that? Steve Winwood. Now he's quite the talent on the piano and the organ. There's no question. I'm personally not a huge fan of his voice. I've never have been. I don't care if it's this stuff or his
Roll with it, baby.
yeah his awful 80s music. I don't care. I can't stand that stuff. I feel like Luis did it like, you feel like sort of that strain, and when he gets to that strain point, he gets real nasally. And something that hasn't been mentioned is he's not a good enunciator. I mean, some of the lyrics, I mean, I don't know what the hell these songs are about besides Barleycorn, because it's an old song and he didn't write it. But I can't understand what he's saying half the time. He's not a very good enunciator. Yeah, it's not an album I would buy. If Glad or Empty Pages came on the radio, I'd listen to them. The rest of it, yeah. And I thought the John Barleycorn Must Die song was 6 minutes and 20 seconds. I'd like to have back. I didn't like that whatsoever. Folk music isn't my thing anyway. But I was glad to listen to it. But yeah, not my thing. Like I said, it will not be added to my collection anytime soon. But I appreciate the listen and the choice. But not for me.
Whiff. Big whiff. All right. George, this seems like something you'd hate. So
not in my wheelhouse, we'll put it that way. But I wouldn't say I hate it. I was new to it. They're a band, like, to the extent that I know any of their stuff, I don't even know that it's them. If I've heard them on FM, I just never associated the name with the songs pretty much. This stuff, the only thing I think I've heard before is Glad. Is there a vocal version of that out there somewhere?
Never heard one.
Some rang in my head there. It's a decent instrumental, nothing special. I think this is where a big portion of where the prog thing comes from. There are some moves in here. They do stretch a little bit. For the time, it probably seemed pretty adventurous. Freedom Rider, it's probably my favorite tune. What couple of the riffs and simple as it is, the chorus, I kind of like what he does there. Steve Winwood, he's got a pleasant tone, but when he goes for notes, he's pitchy. There's just no doubt about it. I'm sure everyone in the comments is gonna be like, you don't know what you're talking about. He's pitchy.
Yes. He is. Yes, he is.
Empty Pages, there's some appealing parts in that, but I'm mostly not feeling it. Don't dislike it. It's just kind of flat. Stranger to Himself, I'm not a fan of this song. This song I dislike, and the guitar solo is a slop-a-thon. I mean,
Yeah.
take that out. I can't believe that Eric didn't ding it on that.
He was
Five, George, five.
John Barleycorn, I like Chad said, my notes here are, give me my 6.5 minutes back. And then I said, no, scratch that. I'll just go hang out with the drummer because he's not doing anything. I'll have
That's right. Remember
Yeah.
last week, Martin Lopez? That guy
Yeah.
would have played the shit out of these songs.
Yeah, they could have done
Capaldi
something.
just decided to fuck it. I'm not doing this.
Put a conga track on there. I don't know, but
Yeah.
they like the way they had it. So, and then it closes with Every Mother's Son. This is all right. Kind of like Empty Pages for me. It doesn't make me feel anything really. It's just kind of flat. I'm convinced that this kind of album, that's classic rock, is not a genre. It's a lump that we put in based on when stuff came out and how it's been played. But all the albums from that, I feel like they're time and place. If you don't get them when they're new or at least not that old, you cannot replicate it. Like there's no way I'm ever going to like this like somebody who picked it up then or at least the 80s. And I just, based on that and based on just it doesn't hit the bells for me, calling it average is about as best as I can do.
George, I thought about that too, George, when I listened to it. If I was of the age when this came out, I probably would have liked it a lot more.
A very good chance, at least.
George, you're saying that there's nothing, let's say, from the 70s that you've never heard that would have the ability to resonate with you?
If
you heard Jimi Hendrix for the first time, I don't know how well you're versed in Hendrix, but if you heard Electric Ladyland for the first time, would you just write it off?
I wonder. I don't have that particular situation because, of course, I grew up on classic rock radio and Hendrix got overplayed to death. But
yeah,
you kind of wonder if something's not frilly like prog or fusion, if it's just kind of very straight, can it have the same effect on you if you don't grow up with it? I wonder about that.
See, that's an interesting question because, for example, for me, I'm a lot older than you, and I'm always discovering new albums from the 70s. You know, that for me, that's my thing is finding old prog rock from the 70s I've never heard.
But you just said something, that's
jazz
your
albums.
thing. That's your thing versus some of us, it might not be our thing.
Yeah.
Well, but that's the question. I mean, if you're younger, does that mean that you're predisposed to not have an appreciation for older music?
Appreciation and like are two different things.
Yeah.
Well, look at it. Chad and I are the same age, but I happen to have to have discovered traffic back in the early mid 80s, and so being that I was so versed in Glad, Freedom Rider, and Empty Pages, it made me want to go out and buy this album. So I had appreciated the album back then. That's also going back to Home. Procol Harum's Home was also from 1970. Then you also have King Crimson with their, if I'm not mistaken, I think Lizard was also 1970. So like a lot of these albums, I was very fortunate that I discovered them then, because do you think that I would love Lizard now in comparison to hearing it back in 88, 87, 86? I don't think I would have.
Mm-hmm. I see a big problem is because I'm the same age as Chuck and Chad, but a lot sexier.
Wow,
we both grew up with Steve Winwood in the MTV era. Okay. And we had Higher Love, we had Finer Things and stuff like that. Those songs definitely wouldn't have made me go back to check out Traffic.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's the same thing with Yes. I grew up on pop radio with Owner of the Lonely Heart, only to go back and hear that they were fucking amazing back in the early 70s, man.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but
you did that when you were a
is
kid, though,
good.
right, Chuck?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's a lot of it's just the age where you're the most impressionable.
Right. Are you capable
Well,
of
you're talking about
internalizing this music at age 50 something, like you were when you were 17?
Yeah, you don't necessarily have to be 15 when it came out to appreciate it. It's when you first heard it.
You're a creature of what you've been exposed to.
Or where you heard it.
Well, I don't know, Ken. Like, for example, I had never heard this until I bought it from you.
Yes.
And it's a fucking great record.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Yep.
Right? I had never heard this either. Another fucking great record.
Great record.
Mm-hmm.
That a lot of people hate. Ensemble Nimbus. Right. All these
That cover.
records. This record, yeah, the cover will cure your constipation. But the point is, this record is from the year 2000, right? And it has a lot of the sonic elements that you can find in the other two that I showed.
But Luis, I think there are different kinds of listeners. I think we might have talked about this before. I mean, like for me, I wanted to hear what's coming around the corner. What haven't I heard? And
Yes,
in your
it's a
case, you're
compulsion.
holding up albums that are in a style that you appreciate, but they kind of fit in a niche, like that Moose Loose album. You've heard, Mahavishnu, Return to Forever. Moose Loose is not like that, but it's not that dissimilar. So here's something else that's kind of like what I like. So it you know what I mean? So it kind of fits right into your wheelhouse.
That's true, but then I can also show you stuff
But a
like
lot of time wheelhouses are built when you're impressionable.
Right.
this.
So that's what I said.
Serbian band Eyot.
What is that?
Eyot, a Serbian fusion band. It's a vehicle for Dejan Ilicic, who's the
Yeah, well, that just proves that you're fucked up. So
it's good shit, dude. I'm just saying. I mean, I appreciate the fact that there's all this great music that I can discover thanks to a guy like you and Steve. But your question is it a matter of age? I don't think so. Because I make a
Some of it
habit
is.
of playing these records to my fucking students who were born in the 2000s, all of them. And some of them really dig them, some of them don't. So it really is, it's an individual thing. It's
there
not
are
an age.
people who hear something that's alien to them and they want to know more about it. They want to explore it. They want to understand it.
Exactly.
And then there's the other kind of person who doesn't understand it and they said, that's not for me.
But there's a third type where you hear something, you're like, you can say, I hear that and it's interesting and I want to dive more in. But some of it could be like, it is just not my thing and I don't want to dive in. That's okay.
Well, but that's the second
okay.
listener. That's really not the third
But-
listener. That's really just the second listener. Somebody said, I don't quite understand it. I mean, there
Well,
are albums that
understanding
I
and
listened
disliking
to and
it-
I didn't understand, but I stuck with them, and then all of a sudden,
But
they
you
came
can't- you
around
can't-
to be some of my favorite albums.
But you can't use the word understand in that context. There's understand and there's dislike. So there are three listeners. There's like,
That's
I
right.
like it and I want to dive in. I don't like it and that's the end of it. Or if you want to throw it out there, the third one, I don't understand it. Okay. I mean, that could be like throwing some hardcore jazz thing at me, some freeform crazy jazz. And I go, I don't know. That's the I don't understand it you like to throw around.
But to circle the album back into this conversation,
Mhm.
is the issue here Traffic is that band that you just can't classify, you can't put into a box? Because I've always thought Traffic were very unique in that what are they? What do they do? Are they a pop band, a folk band, a jazz rock band, a prog band, a psychedelic band? They're
I
kind
don't
of
think
but
classification has anything
then-
to do with it, really.
But then I have a question for you, Pete. What would you classify Family? Very similar band.
very similar. There's a
Mhm.
handful of bands that are like this, that are just kind of
Mhm.
like, they're like an enigma. You either
Mhm.
like it or you don't. And to some people, there's too many little different things going on that it's hard to kind of say. I mean, Chad, you talk about this whole understand thing, and Ken talk about it. It's like, to some people, Traffic are like, they're so odd because they don't fit into any box. A lot of people like bands that fit into boxes.
Yeah.
Like, this is this and this is this. Traffic really isn't anything. They're like this amoeba that just kind of floats around the early 70s music scene. They do a little bit of everything. That's weird to some people.
Yeah, that part of that aspect of this album didn't bother me at all.
As a matter of fact, I think that Kent's and somebody who I knew through the channel before I was on it, he has a very interesting mind. I watched the episode that you two guys did on the band Nile, the extreme metal band, and I was instantly hooked. I went out and I got an album and I just started buying back the collection. I will say this: I didn't have very many flattering things to say about this record, right? But I'm gonna go listen to some other Traffic records now.
Listen
Because
to Low Spark of High Heeled Boys.
So
Mhm.
I'm gonna try a couple of others, right? Because now I'm intrigued.
That's more of a band album.
For
Mhm.
me,
Until you hear Rick Gretsch and Jim Capaldi sing.
Okay, well then there will be disappointments, I'm sure, but I'm still intrigued, right? And that to me is the thing. I am always interested in hearing new things. To me, I'm not necessarily looking for people to innovate every time, but I am interested in hearing new ideas, new songs, even if they're fucking old, right? I was 1 year old when this came out, right? But I still want to hear. Now I'm curious, right? I want to see what the fuck these guys were about, because I already took the plunge, right?
Yeah, you know, if you guys are saying that they evolved as more of a full band on Low Spark, I have it. I'll listen to it.
But you won't like anything before this. I can guarantee
Well,
that.
or it's really a different band. It's a different
Yep,
sound.
mhm.
Yeah.
Different sound, different band, and as I mentioned before, and so what's the group family? If you think that these guys are eclectic and you don't like the vocals, what's that family is even more eclectic than they are. Mhm. And that Electric Goat, man, I don't think you guys would get into that, man.
Christian, when I posted this on my Facebook page the other day, that said I was playing it, and all my fans said this is their best record, and I was like, no, it's not. But it seems like it's very beloved. So
It's my favorite.
A lot of our
move on
fans
to
are
Low
gonna be
But it's not
comments.
it's not their best. It's my favorite.
I know it's
but
not their best, but it's very beloved, and I think a lot of people that watch this show are going to be like, "Oh, Luis, you're crazy."
No, I
I
don't
think
think
for
Lewis
most
is
people,
crazy.
this is probably
Well, but,
the
this is part of the fun for me.
Yeah.
No. So anyway, Ken, I never did get the call on you. Is this your favorite Traffic album? Second favorite, like everybody else? Or
It's my second favorite. Low Spark is the masterpiece.
Mhm.
And I hate to say it, but Anthony really got it right. I mean, this is kind of like the preface to Low Spark. You know, this band had broken up. This was this was supposed to be his solo album. The boys are getting back together, and they're not really a complete unit that they would evolve into. And there were a lot of different guys that went in and out of this band. You know, once they reformed. Low Spark is, for me, is the pinnacle. But there's a lot of great stuff on this record. I mean, I've had this album, I don't know, 40 some odd years. I'm sick of listening to it. I listened to it like 6 times this week. But it was interesting. Some of the things that, as I said, like I was playing it in the car the other day, and my wife, I said, "Hey, is it okay if I play Traffic?" And she doesn't really know from Traffic, and she's like, "I know all these songs."
Mhm.
You know? She was like, really impressed at how great these songs were. I think for me, I think the first side is better than the second side. The 2 weakest songs are on side 2. Those are the tracks that were the ones that Winwood wrote first. Stranger to Himself and Every Mother's Son. Those were the tracks that started off for his solo album. And I think that it's kind of interesting. Winwood plays very little guitars, as we've discussed. It's mostly acoustic guitar. The electric guitar he plays on here, when he does play, it's kind of cringeworthy. It's not particularly not
good.
Great. The guy who I think first of all, Capaldi wrote half is the co-writer on all the songs, except for John Barleycorn. So he has to get some credit. But for me, the guy who's the real star of the album is Chris Wood.
Yep.
He's the magic. His sax and flute, they provide all the color. I mean, when he plays an electric sax through a wah-wah pedal, I mean, that's the lead. Winwood he's very kind of laid back for the most part in the mix. He's playing either electric piano or he's playing organ. And he's, I love Steve Winwood, but he's not Keith Emerson, I mean, and the music doesn't call for that.
Doesn't need it.
So, but what was funny is I hadn't played the album in so long. I mean, my go-to is always Low Spark. And I always think in my mind, because of the title track, I always think of it as like a folk album or folk rock album. That track is the outlier on the whole album. Yeah. And, it's completely uncharacteristic from the album. It's a nice piece of music. And I like Fairport Convention and all the British folk stuff. So for me, I have no problem with that track. I think it's beautifully done. But again, I keep going back to Chris Wood. kind of, you know, at times his playing is just very lyrical. He's, you know, is almost like listening to like Yusef Lateef. Other times it's almost like, you know, almost like listening to Herbie Mann or somebody like that. I mean, it does have a little bit of a jazz element, I guess, because of the sax and the flute. I wouldn't call this a jazz rock album.
No.
I'm not even sure I call it a prog rock album. I think it's just a product of its time. I mean, in 1970, nothing was called progressive rock. Bands were just evolving. They were just being what they felt like being. And I think that's just what this album is. It's a classic rock album. And yeah, my second favorite. I think it's a fine album. And actually, I don't think it's particularly bad recording. It's not as good recording as Low Spark. If you're into vinyl, as everybody knows I am, this is what you want. You want the pink label, British pressing, original. That's the one. Not bad.
So Pete, what do you think?
I'm a fan. This is my second favorite Traffic album, has been. I've had this album for ages. I got into Traffic fairly early on. They were one of the few kind of like non-metal or hard rock bands I was listening to back when I was younger. I always liked Steve Winwood's vocals. I would agree some of his solo stuff got a little
Easy.
saccharine later on, but I still think the Arc of a Diver album is pretty terrific.
Excellent album.
Yeah, that was
Excellent album.
Breakthrough. But I hadn't listened to John Barleycorn in a number of years before we, you know, got on this assignment 2 weeks ago. And like a couple of people said, Low Spark is kind of my go-to album for this band. That's really an amazing record. But it's interesting, like in re-listening to this again, even though I know it so well after not hearing it for years, I mean, this is really strong too. And it's not that far behind Low Spark for me. And I went and started listening to some of the other albums in the Traffic catalog. And I found like over the years that like the first album, with the exception of Dear Mr. Fantasy, I really can't even listen to some of that stuff anymore. That kind of like weird British folky pop thing, psychedelic pop thing that they were doing really doesn't sit well with me. And, you know, you talk about how the title track on this album, Ken, is the outlier because it is kind of pretty much folk. Dear Mr. Fantasy is like the total outlier on their first album because that's a good kind of like rocker. Yeah, and a great guitar solo. And the rest of the album is like this kind of weird kind of psychedelic pop stuff that just like, I don't know, doesn't do anything for me. So I think for me, the album where this band really started to become like the Traffic that I really love is this album. Even though there's some good material on the second album and, you know, the Exit album's got some good stuff, but I think this going forward, all pretty strong releases. And like I said, I love his Hammond organ and electric piano work on here. I agree. I think Chris Wood, his playing is great and it adds so much to this band. And like when you go like almost the whole song without hearing any flute or sax, you kind of miss it and you realize that something's not quite there. But I really like it. I think out of all the songs, I mean, Glad is terrific. I love Glad, Freedom Rider, and Empty Pages. I think are sequenced so perfectly. Boom, boom, boom. And they just like kind of like you just expect everything to just kind of flow, and it does. Really, 3 great songs in a row. I like Stranger to Himself. I think there's a little bit of Steve's early Spencer Davis group elements going on there, which I think is kind of neat. John Barleycorn I liked, kind of like mystical folk. You know, I'm not really a folk guy either, but I kind of dig that. And I like Every Mother's Son. I like the organ in that. I like the vocals. There's some nice little guitars going on there, and it's a really great vocal from him. So again, like I said before, I think there's a little bit of everything on this album, which for some people makes a nice, varied, well-rounded listen. For others, there's too much different stuff going on here. Maybe that's why Traffic doesn't resonate with some people. But personally, I think it's a winner. I really like it a lot, and I'm glad this was chosen because, like I said, I haven't listened to this in a while, and it was good to revisit it all over again. Did we lose someone here?
Yeah, Chad.
Yeah, Chad fell off.
We got so nauseated by our love for this album.
I guess so.
I have a question for you guys who grew up listening to this. I've heard more than one person refer to it as a little jazzy. But here's where I have trouble with it. Like what I hear jazzy in this record, it reminds me of that movie with that fake announcer who's really good at flute, Burgundy, whatever. And he
I'm Burgundy.
jams, yeah, and he jams with this jazz flute in this bar. To me, this is what this. I mean, I don't get the jazz. Like Glad, we mentioned this song, right? A minor, D minor, E minor. But then it changes key for the solo, and it's A sharp minor, D sharp, and E major, right? So is that why you guys are calling it jazz? Because the Beatles would do shit like that and even more.
No, I think, Luis, I think it has more to it could be laziness, but whenever you hear sax, people kind of fall back on the, it's jazzy, because I think that I'm sure, Chris Wood, what he listened to in his upbringing were probably jazz players. So he brings that element, but I wouldn't, like, for example, I wouldn't call this a jazz rock album.
No, right?
But then I have a
has
question.
elements. Yeah, there's
But then
a
I-
also
but there's-
there's woodwinds. Yeah,
But
then
it always kind of goes back to the sax, the flute, the sax more so than the flute. And I think, like I said, there's a bit of laziness, I think, when we say, it's like, when people say that, like David Jackson, like, that, like Van de Graaff, it's like jazz rock. It's like, no, it's not.
No, it's not.
I mean, it's not at all.
Nowhere near.
I mean, so,
But then you think about early Coliseum and Graham Bond organization. These were bands that were either blues rock or they dwelled into jazz themselves.
yeah, they were jazz players.
They were jazz players. Think about all the musicians that made their debut with Graham Bond. Jack
Dick
Bruce.
Hextall Smith was a jazz player.
He was a great player. I just really wish that he'd have lived longer to have done more. He was an amazing woodwind player.
Luis, Luis, you really should, if you're gonna check out anything else by the band, Low Spark of High Hill Boys.
Yes,
Because like Chuck was saying, they were at that point they really had evolved into a band, and the music was much more expansive, and it was much more had a much more unified sound. It was a more cohesive record. It wasn't a Steve Winwood solo album.
and it's a great sounding record. Great
You
sound.
have 12-minute tracks on there.
I bought those two together. When I bought this, I also bought Low Spark, but I haven't heard it yet.
I'd be curious what you think. It's more exploratory, if I could use that word.
Well, one of my favorite songs on Low Spark is Rainmaker. The last song on the album. What's it? The overall album is just great. But when you think of Traffic, you think of Steve Winwood. You don't think about Gene Capaldi singing or Rick Gretsch. But still pretty much excellent album. I think that would be an album that you would appreciate a bit more than this one. Although I love this album, as mentioned. Thanks again, Christian. Loved it.
And Luis,
Yeah, man, it was a good choice.
Luis, when you listen to Low Spark, you'll say it'll be very easy for you to pick out which track is my favorite. I can guarantee you that.
It's the track that Eddie Jobson plays on.
Wow. Oh, come on, man.
All right. Good job, Chris.
I want to say. Now, Pete, I don't know if you remember this the same way I did, but when we saw Steve Winwood a few years ago, I was not
glad you brought that up. Yes.
Not thinking anything bad about his electric guitar playing at all. I was impressed.
He was really, really good. Yeah.
The thing is that he actually is a fine player, but it just seems like this album, like I said, he probably just was like, let me just think of this, and I think that this will go over here. So, well, remember he played in a Spencer Davis group, when he was there.
He was the organ player in that band, wasn't he?
Yes, he was, but he also played the guitar as well, and then also Blind Faith as well. Yes, and Blind Faith.
There are a few other guitar players in Blind Faith.
Yeah, some guy named Rick.
I think that I can't imagine Steve Winwood competing with Eric Clapton. I'm sorry.
No.
There's a YouTube video of him playing Can't Find My Way Home. I mean, if you see him sitting in front of a fireplace, it's just Steve and a guitar. And he plays the whole thing in drop D on his acoustic guitar. And it's nice. I think, if you give a shit, check it out.
I will do.
Welcome back, Chad.
Yep, thanks.
So what's the next album we're doing?
So before we get to that, so for everybody watching, you know how it goes. Down in the comments, let us know what you think of John Barleycorn Must Die, plus or minus any kind of feedback on the album. And this was a lot of fun talking about this one. And George, I'll turn it over to you for a minute before we leave everybody. You want to let everybody know what our next album study will be 2 weeks from tonight?
Yeah, I wanted to pick something that would shake it up a little bit. Something that would draw a reaction out of some people. So went a little different. Prog metal.
Oh,
Aha.
all right.
Dream Day Unite by Dream Theater.
Okay.
You're not having Charlie Domenici on.
No, in fact, it will be a album study as well as a little tribute to Charlie. So kind of
I didn't realize he was that old.
yeah, Charlie
Yeah.
was 70 something. Yeah, he was like 15.
How
or
old
something.
was he?
72.
Really?
Don't say he's that old, but
Because all the guys in Dream Theater are roughly many of our
50
age.
something, right?
Yeah, he was.
Well,
he was
not Rudis though.
Yeah, he's a little bit older. That's right. Yeah.
Ken and Charlie went to elementary school together.
Oh yeah, when Dream
That
and Day
one
Unite
over
will be the next album study 2 weeks from today. So for everybody watching and everybody here on the panel, start listening. We'll be talking about it, and we might have a special guest on that show. I'll leave it at that. So we'll see how it goes. Anyway, thanks for watching, everybody, and thanks to Chris for hosting this episode and picking out our album study. John Barleycorn Must Die. Visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube all together.
All
the
the
damn
damn
time.
time.
Please subscribe if you haven't already and click on that notification bell so you get alert of all of our content as a post so you don't miss any episodes of In the Prog Seat. And please do hit the like button before you leave. Thanks for watching, everybody. For Chad Hutchinson, Chris Canzaneri, Chuck Alvarez, George Lemie, Ken Golden, Anthony Ferraro, Eric Porter, and Mr. Lewis Nasser. I am Pete Pardo. Thanks for watching, everybody. See you in 2 weeks for When Dreamin' Day from Dream Theater. Bye-bye.
Jesus.